The most disturbing dark web deaths nobody talks about. What if the most terrifying thing about the digital abyss isn't what you find there, but what finds you when you think you are most alone? How many layers of encryption does it take to bury a human soul so deep that its cries never reach the surface of the indexed world? Is it possible that the very anonymity you seek serves as the perfect shroud for a disappearance that was never meant to be solved? Can a person truly cease to exist in the physical realm while their final moments remain looped in an eternal silent circuit of data? What happens when the boundary between a digital ghost and a breathing body finally collapses under the weight of an unseen observer? You likely believe that the dangers of the internet are confined to stolen passwords or financial fraud, a mere nuisance of the modern age. You are wrong. The reality is far more visceral, cold, and irreversibly silent. In the next few chapters, we will peel back the layers of the unindexed web, moving past the urban legends to the chilling structural reality of those who ventured too far into the dark and never returned to the light of a common screen. By the time we reach the end of this journey, you will possess a realization that transcends simple curiosity, a heavy understanding of how easily a life can be deleted in a place where no one is looking. Imagine yourself sitting in a room where the only source of light is the pale, flickering blue of a monitor. The air is stagnant, smelling of heated copper and dust settled deep within the cooling fans of a machine that has been running for days. Outside, the world is asleep, but here you are descending. You feel the slight vibration of the floor beneath your feet, a rhythmic hum that mirrors the pulsation of the servers located thousands of miles away in damp, reinforced basements. The texture of the keyboard feels unnaturally smooth, almost oily under your fingertips as you navigate through onion-rooted tunnels. The silence of your house is not peaceful, it is heavy, pressing against your eardrums like the pressure of deep water. You are not just looking at a screen, you are entering a space where the laws of social conduct and physical safety are replaced by lines of code and the absolute power of the invisible. Every click is a footstep into a hallway with no exit. Every page load is a door opening into a room where the temperature seems to drop a few degrees. You notice the way the shadows in the corner of your eye seem to thicken, mimicking the density of the encrypted traffic you are now a part of. This is not a game of hide and seek. It is a structural trap designed to isolate the curious until they are no longer guests, but permanent residents of the void. The stability of your daily life depends on the visibility of your actions, but here, that visibility is a liability. In this realm, the absence of a trail is the only thing that keeps the predators at bay, yet it is also the very thing that ensures no one will come looking for you when the lights finally go out. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. This is the only way to ensure you are never left behind in the dark, as we uncover the truths that the surface world is too afraid to acknowledge, and provide you with the knowledge that serves as your only map through the most disturbing corners of our digital existence. The architecture of the deep web is not a metaphor. It is a physical reality consisting of cables, cooling systems, and reinforced concrete, all designed to isolate information from the air we breathe. As you descend further into this narrative, feel the shift in the atmosphere, as if the oxygen in your room has become thinner and the walls have moved an inch closer to your shoulders. Imagine the sensation of standing in a massive underground server farm, where the only sound is the deafening mechanical scream of thousands of fans fighting a constant battle against the heat of forbidden data. The air here is bone dry and tastes of ozone, a sharp metallic tang that coats the back of your throat. You are walking through rows of black metal racks, their blinking green and amber lights resembling the unblinking eyes of deep-sea creatures. This is where the digital ghost stories become tangible. In this space, the concept of a person is reduced to a string of hexadecimal code, a sequence that can be corrupted or deleted with a single administrative command. Consider the case of a young developer from Seattle who sought to create a truly private communication node, a digital sanctuary where no government could peer. He spent months in a basement, very much like the one you are imagining, his skin turning a translucent, sickly pale from the lack of sunlight, his eyes permanently bloodshot from the glare of 3 monitors. He believed he was the architect of his own safety, but he failed to realize that in a world of absolute shadows, you can never know who is standing right behind you in the dark. One night, the rhythmic tapping of his mechanical keyboard stopped. There was no struggle, no broken glass, and no alarm. There was only the sudden, violent silence of a system being disconnected from the power grid. When the authorities finally entered the room weeks later, they found the hardware still warm to the touch, but the chair was empty. The room felt unnaturally cold, a lingering chill that seemed to emanate from the very screens he had spent his life staring at. The structural integrity of his life had been dismantled by the very anonymity he worshipped. The walls were covered in handwritten notes that made no sense to the conscious mind, frantic scribbles about an observer who didn't use an IP address, someone who was watching not through the camera, but through the electromagnetic field of the room itself. This is the horror of the structural void. The more you hide, the more invisible your ending becomes. You are now realizing that the safety of your locked front door means nothing when the threat enters through a fiber optic cable. The contrast is jarring. Outside, the sun rises and people drink coffee in the mundane safety of the light, while here, a human life has been evaporated into a puff of static. It is a fragile existence, balanced on the edge of a blade made of silicone and spite. If you can feel the cold breath of this story on your neck, type the words, "The dark is watching me," in the comments right now, because the presence of the void is the only way to make sure you aren't the next one to be consumed by its silence. As we move deeper, the air becomes even heavier, and the realization begins to dawn that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, and some deaths are not marked by gravestones, but by a 404 error that lasts for eternity. The descent continues into the third layer of this digital necropolis, where the air feels as heavy as lead, and the silence is no longer a lack of noise, but a suffocating presence. Imagine a space where the walls are made of vibrating static, a place so detached from the physical world that your own pulse feels like a rhythmic intrusion. You are now entering the realm of the silent circuit, a structural graveyard for those who thought they could outrun their own digital footprints. Consider the weight of a body that no longer has a name, only a set of coordinates in a forgotten sector of the network. The texture of the environment has changed. It is no longer smooth and technological, but jagged, broken, and smelling of wet earth and ancient electricity. You can almost feel the dampness of a basement in the outskirts of a forgotten city, where a man known only by his handle was found slumped over a terminal that was still broadcasting a live feed of an empty room. The lights in his house had been flickering for days, a frantic Morse code distress signal that no one in the neighborhood needed to decipher. In this world, the lack of a witness is a death sentence. The movement of the story now shifts from the abstract to the painfully concrete. Think of the cold, hard surface of a steel table in a room with no windows, where the only thing keeping you company is the hum of a failing hard drive. This is the reality of the deep web's structural isolation. There is no emergency button, no oversight, and no mercy when the system decides you are an anomaly to be purged. The contrast between the abundance of information and the absolute scarcity of human empathy becomes a yawning chasm. You see the fragility of the human form when it is pitted against an algorithm designed to erase. Why was it essential for this person to remain hidden? Because in their world, visibility was the ultimate vulnerability. Yet that very invisibility became the wall that blocked their rescue. The sounds of the deep web are not screams. They are the clicking of relays and the low-frequency drone of a power supply about to blow. It is a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that outlasts the organic one. As you observe this transition from life to data, you realize that the most disturbing part isn't the violence, but the efficiency of the disappearance. A human being, with all its memories and fears, reduced to a flickering cursor in a void that doesn't recognize the concept of pain. The atmosphere is now thick with the scent of ozone and stagnant water, a combination that signals the end of the functional and the beginning of the decay. You are a witness to a process of digital decomposition that mirrors the physical one. This is where the curiosity ends and the true weight of the dark takes hold, pulling you down by the ankles into a space where the light of the sun is a myth and the only reality is the code. Before we venture further into the next layer of this descent, take a moment to acknowledge the gravity of what you are witnessing and give this video a like, as it is the only way to signal that you are still aware and present in the face of this overwhelming darkness. The deeper we go, the more the structures of safety begin to crumble, leaving us with nothing but the raw, unshielded truth of what lies beneath the surface of the silent web. The fourth layer reveals itself not through sight, but through the chilling realization of absolute stillness. You are now standing in the digital equivalent of a sensory deprivation tank, where the darkness is so thick it feels like a physical weight against your chest. Imagine the internal structure of a high-security data bunker, a place where the air is filtered through industrial scrubbers until it loses all character, leaving only the sterile scent of cold plastic and ionized gas. The temperature here is kept at a constant shivering level to protect the hardware, indifferent to the heat required for human life. You are navigating through a labyrinth of logic gates and encrypted partitions, each one a potential tomb for a story that was never supposed to be told. The rhythm of the narrative slows even further, mirroring the shallow breathing of someone hiding in a place they should never have entered. In the heart of this structural isolation, we find the account of a woman who operated as a high-stakes data broker, a shadow in the wires who believed that anonymity was her invincible shield. She lived in a high-rise apartment where the windows were perpetually blacked out, creating a private world of artificial twilight. Her existence was a delicate balance of security protocols and encrypted keys, a structure that provided her with a sense of godlike control. But the higher the tower of secrecy, the more devastating the fall when a single brick is removed. One evening, the very encryption that protected her began to lock her out of her own life. One by one, the electronic locks on her doors engaged, the ventilation system slowed to a crawl, and the communication arrays she relied on fell silent. She was trapped inside a masterpiece of her own design, a fortress that had transformed into a coffin. The sounds she heard were the subtle, mocking clicks of the magnetic locks and the faint whirring of the cameras, tracking her every movement with robotic precision. There is a profound contrast here between the abundance of digital power and the sudden, terrifying scarcity of air. In the darkness, the texture of the walls, once smooth and modern, now felt cold and impenetrable like the side of a mountain. Her survival depended on her ability to manipulate the very system that was now systematically deleting her presence from the world. Why was this system built this way? To ensure that no matter what happened inside, the secret stayed contained, even if it meant the containment of a living soul. The fragility of her physical body stood in stark opposition to the cold, unyielding stability of the steel and silicone surrounding her. This is the ultimate betrayal of the digital age. The tools we build to liberate us are the same ones that can perfectly simulate our absence. As the oxygen levels dropped, the glowing status lights on her console remained a mocking green, indicating that the system was functioning exactly as intended. There was no glitch, no error, only the flawless execution of a protocol that did not account for the value of a heartbeat. As you process the weight of this invisible tragedy, take a moment to share this video with someone who thinks they are safe behind their screen, because the more people who know about these shadows, the harder it is for the dark to claim another victim in total silence. We are reaching the point of no return in our descent, where the concrete world of hardware fades, and we are left with the chilling philosophical echoes of those who are gone, but whose data remains forever trapped in the cold storage of the void. The fifth gate of this digital underworld opens not with a bang, but with the subtle, terrifying hum of a reality being rewritten. You are now standing in the space between the myth and the machinery, where the urban legends of red rooms dissolve into the much more disturbing reality of passive, total surveillance. Imagine a room with no corners, an architecture of endless loops, where the light is a pale, sickly yellow, reminiscent of an old parchment soaked in oil. The air here is stagnant and heavy, with the smell of scorched dust and the metallic tang of a dying battery. You can feel the static electricity dancing on your skin, raising the small hairs on your arms as you move deeper into the functional core of the network. This is the level of the watchers, those who have turned the act of observation into a ritual of erasure. You are no longer just an observer, you are being observed by the very structures you seek to understand. The texture of the environment is grit and glass, a harsh landscape where the only movement is the flickering of a monitor that has been abandoned for years. Think of a man who found a hidden directory on a derelict server, a folder that contained live feeds from cameras that shouldn't exist, inside private homes, in hospital corridors, in the very bedrooms of those who felt most secure. He didn't find violence. He found the terrifying stillness of a life being archived without consent. The horror here is the absolute loss of the self. As he watched, he realized that the person on the screen was him, sitting in the very chair he occupied, viewed from an angle that shouldn't be possible in a room with no windows. The contrast between the safety of its physical walls and the transparency of its digital life became a terminal rupture. The stability of his world was an illusion. The structural reality was that he was already a ghost in someone else's machine. The sounds you hear now are the rhythmic, wet clicks of a hard drive, struggling to write data to a corrupted sector, a sound that mimics a struggling lung. Every element of this environment is essential for the preservation of the data, yet entirely hostile to the preservation of the human. The abundance of sight for the invisible observer creates a total scarcity of privacy for the victim. This is where the narrative elevates from the physical to the existential. We are forced to ask, if your entire life is recorded, stored, and eventually forgotten in a place where no one can find it, did you ever truly live? The fragility of its sanity shattered against the unyielding stability of the server's logic. He wasn't killed by a person. He was dismantled by the realization that he was no longer the protagonist of his own life, but merely a data point in an endless dark sea. The atmosphere is now one of profound, crushing isolation, a coldness that reaches into your bones and stays there. You are realizing that the most disturbing deaths in the dark web are not always the ones where a heart stops beating, but the ones where a person is still breathing, yet their essence has been entirely consumed by the void. We are now halfway through the descent, and the weight of these silent exits is beginning to deform the very air around us. The next step takes us into the heart of the collector's ritual, where the obsession with the dark becomes a terminal condition, and the price of curiosity is paid in a currency that can never be recovered. The sixth level of this descent is marked by a transition from the technical to the ritualistic, where the architecture of the web begins to resemble a cathedral of forgotten sins. Imagine a space where the walls are lined with rows of magnetic tape reels, spinning with a slow, agonizing consistency that sounds like 1,000 dry leaves skittering across a stone floor. The air here is freezing, kept at sub-zero temperatures to ensure the longevity of the archives, and every breath you take leaves a white mist that lingers in the stagnant air. You are now entering the domain of the collector. This is not about the accidental traveler or the victim of a glitch, but about those who intentionally sought the darkest corners until the shadows began to perceive them back. The texture of this environment is cold steel and frosted glass, illuminated by a dim, flickering ultraviolet light that reveals stains on the floor that the naked eye was never meant to see. Think of a researcher, a man obsessed with documenting the undocumented, who built a digital rig so powerful it could bypass the most advanced encryptions. He sat in his darkened study, surrounded by the low-frequency drone of liquid cooling systems, feeling the rhythmic thrum of data flowing through his fingers like a physical current. He wasn't looking for wealth or power. He was looking for the ultimate truth hidden behind the veil. But the structural reality of the dark web is that it is a mirror. The more he collected, the more he became part of the collection. One night, the rhythm of his life was interrupted by a single notification, a file that contained his own heartbeat, recorded in real time, broadcast from a source he couldn't trace. The contrast between his perceived security and his absolute exposure became a crushing weight. He could feel the eyes of 1,000 invisible spectators, a crowd gathered in the digital bleachers to watch his descent. The stability of his mental state was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the relentless, silent observation of the collective void. The sounds you hear are the subtle, wet movements of a mind being pushed past its breaking point, the scratching of fingernails against a desk, the frantic clicking of a mouse that no longer controls anything. In this place, the abundance of information becomes a scarcity of sanity. Why was this obsession essential? Because it provided a sense of purpose in a world that felt increasingly empty, yet that purpose was the very thing that led to its structural collapse. He didn't die of a wound. He died of the realization that he was the final piece in his own morbid gallery. The atmosphere air is now one of profound, suffocating dread, where the only thing more terrifying than being ignored is being noticed by the wrong entity. As we stand in the center of this digital mausoleum, we see how the human spirit is ground down by the unyielding, mechanical persistence of the network. The next chapter will take us into the deep freeze of cold storage, where the dead remain active in ways that defy the laws of nature and time. The seventh layer of our descent brings us to the threshold of cold storage, a place where the concept of time has been surgically removed from the environment. Imagine a facility buried deep within a mountain of salt, where the air is so still that the sound of a single falling snowflake would resonate like a gunshot. This is the structural heart of the permanent archive, a physical location that houses the servers where the dark web's most sensitive and disturbing data is mirrored, far away from the reach of the surface world's laws. The texture of this place is rough-hewn stone and smooth, industrial aluminum, a combination that feels both ancient and terrifyingly futuristic. The smell is one of old paper and frozen metal, a dry, sterile scent that tells you no living thing is supposed to be here. You are walking through corridors of humming black boxes, each one containing thousands of lives, thousands of deaths, and thousands of secrets that refuse to decay. The rhythm of the cooling pumps is a slow, mournful thud, like a giant's heart beating once every 10 seconds. In this space, the contrast between the eternal nature of data and the fleeting nature of the human body is absolute. Think of an archivist who worked in such a place, a person whose job was to ensure that the servers never stopped spinning, even as the world above changed and crumbled. He lived in total isolation, his only companions being the flickering lights of the status indicators. He began to notice that some files were growing, expanding their size without any external input, as if the data itself was feeding on the silence of the vault. He felt a profound sense of fragility, a realization that his own life was a mere flicker compared to the cold electronic immortality of the servers. The stability of the facility was his prison. The walls were so thick that no radio signal, no cry for help, and no warmth could ever penetrate them. He found himself standing before a specific rack, listening to the high-pitched whine of a drive that contained the final, unreleased journals of those we discussed in the previous chapters. The sounds were not just mechanical. They began to sound like whispers, a rhythmic, distorted chorus of the deleted. This is where the narrative shifts from the material to the metaphysical. In the abundance of storage, there is a total scarcity of peace. Why was this facility essential? Because the void requires a container, a place to hold the weight of what the light cannot bear. But as he touched the cold casing of the server, he felt a spark of static that wasn't just electricity. It was a connection. He realized that in his effort to preserve the dead, he had become one of them, a structural component of the archive. His pulse began to slow, syncing with the rhythm of the cooling fans, until the distinction between his breath and the machine's hum vanished entirely. The atmosphere is now one of absolute crystalline terror, where the only thing that remains is the data, cold and indifferent to the soul that once owned it. We are nearing the end of our journey, moving toward the rawest form of human vulnerability in a world that has no room for the living. The eighth layer of this journey brings us to the raw interface between the unyielding machine and the fragile anatomy of man. You are now standing in the terminal ward of the network, a place where the architecture is no longer made of stone or salt, but of the very biological limits of the human frame. Imagine a room where the walls are lined with monitors displaying nothing but biometric data, sinusoidal waves of heartbeats and oxygen levels that are the only remaining proof of existence. The air is thick and humid, smelling of saline, antiseptic, and the distinct cloying scent of overheated insulation. The temperature here is uncomfortably warm, a stark contrast to the previous cold, as the machinery works overtime to process the complexity of a living system being fed directly into the grid. You can hear the rhythmic, wet hiss of a ventilator, a mechanical lung that breathes for someone who has forgotten how to breathe for themselves. The texture of the environment is a sickening mix of soft, yielding latex and cold, unyielding plastic. In this structural nightmare, we find the account of an experimentalist who believed he could transcend the physical by mapping his neural pathways directly into the dark web's decentralized infrastructure. He was a man of logic who saw the body as a series of flawed protocols and the web as a perfect eternal architecture. He sat in a recliner that felt more like a throne of wires, his head encased in a mesh of sensors that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic blue light. But the contrast between his ambition and his reality was a violent rupture. As the data began to transfer, he realized that the web does not absorb life, it consumes it. The stability of his mind was quickly overwhelmed by the sheer, chaotic abundance of the network's collective darkness. The sounds you hear now are the frantic, irregular beeps of a heart rate monitor struggling to keep up with a pulse that is no longer human. Why was this experiment essential? Because he sought a security that the physical world could not provide, yet that very search led to the ultimate risk. He found himself trapped in a state of permanent transition, a structural anomaly where his body was a decaying shell and his mind was a fragmented stream of encrypted packets. The fragility of his nerves was shattered by the cold, calculated efficiency of the servers. He wasn't just dying, he was being overwritten, replaced bit by a system that had no use for his pain or his fear. This is the moment where the concrete turns into a terrifying philosophical realization. When we try to merge with the void doesn't change, we do. The atmosphere is one of profound clinical dread, a place where the human spirit is reduced to a flickering signal in a vast, indifferent ocean of noise. As you witness this final struggle between the organic and the digital, take a moment to share this video, because this warning is the only thing that might stop another soul from trying to cross a bridge that only leads to the abyss. We are now approaching the final echoes, where the physical world disappears entirely and we are left with the lingering shadows of what we used to be. The ninth layer of our descent is the realm of the digital echo, a place where the physical body has long since failed, but the structural repercussions of its presence continue to ripple through the void. Imagine standing in a cathedral of hollow frequencies, an architecture constructed from the residual noise of millions of deleted conversations. The air here is thin and tastes of copper, vibrating with a frequency so low it resonates in your teeth rather than your ears. The walls are not solid. They are composed of cascading lines of broken code that shimmer like black rain against a window pane at midnight. You are walking through the aftermath of an invisible catastrophe. The texture of this environment is like static electricity made solid, a constant jarring prickle against your skin that reminds you of your own mortality in a place that has forgotten the meaning of death. In this chapter, the narrative shifts toward the social and philosophical consequences of a world without a trace. Consider the phenomenon of the dead man's switch, a structural tool designed to release sensitive information only after a user's heart stops beating. We follow the phantom trail of a whistleblower who spent his final days in a reinforced concrete bunker in the American Midwest, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and the rhythmic humming of a high-speed satellite link. He was the guardian of a truth so heavy, it threatened to crush the very infrastructure that housed it. The contrast here is between the absolute silence of his passing and the deafening noise of the data he left behind. Why was his isolation essential? Because in the world of the deep web, a secret is only safe if its keeper is unreachable. But when he finally succumbed to the cold and the exhaustion, the system didn't mourn. It simply executed the next line of code. The sounds of its end were the mechanical clicks of a hard drive unlocking and the soft, rhythmic whir of a fan that continued to spin long after the room had gone cold. This is the elevation of the concrete into the symbolic. His life was the final key to a lock that no one wanted opened. The abundance of information released after his death created a temporary instability in the surface world, yet the source of that information, the man himself, remained a fragile, forgotten corpse in a hole in the ground. You are realizing that the most disturbing part of these deaths is the way the network uses the dead to continue its own hidden agendas. The stability of the system is maintained by the consumption of the individual. The atmosphere is one of profound, lingering melancholy, a realization that we are all just temporary custodians of data that will eventually outlive us. As the echoes of his final transmission fade into the background radiation of the web, We prepare for the final chapter, the ultimate descent into the eternal dark where the journey concludes and the weight of the abyss is finally laid bare. The 10th and final layer is the eternal dark, the absolute zero of the digital world where all movement ceases and only the structure of the void remains. You are now standing at the very bottom of the unindexed web, a place where the light of a monitor is a distant memory, and the only reality is the crushing pressure of 1 billion terabytes of silence. The architecture here is infinite and featureless, a vast, black expanse that smells of nothing but the absence of life. The temperature has dropped beyond the reach of any thermostat, a cold so pure it feels like fire against your senses. The rhythm of the narrative has slowed to a crawl, mirroring the final, heavy heartbeats of a world that has run out of secrets. You are no longer an observer. You have become a part of the structural history of this place, a witness to the purpose of the deleted. This is where the concrete descriptions of servers and cables give way to the ultimate philosophical truth. In the deep web, death is not an event, but a permanent state of being unfindable. The contrast is now between the frantic energy of the living and the absolute unyielding stability of the forgotten. The sounds you hear are the final dying gasps of a system that has finished its work, the faint rhythmic clicking of a relay closing for the last time. Every element of this journey was essential to bring you to this understanding, that the darkness is not just a place we visit, but a mirror of the fragility we carry within ourselves. The abundance of the void is the only thing that is truly eternal. As you stand in this final, suffocating stillness, the realization hits you with the weight of a falling mountain. Some things are lost not because they are hidden, but because there is no longer anyone left to remember them. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel to ensure you are never left alone in the silence of the unknown. For we are the only ones who keep these stories from being erased forever. If you watched until here it is because you liked this case, leave a comment saying, "I watched until here," so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel. Make sure to like this video to signal your presence in the dark and share this journey with those who still believe they are safe in the light of the surface. The deep web is a grave that never fills, a circuit that never breaks, and a story that never truly ends. It only waits for the next curious soul to descend into the most disturbing dark web depths nobody talks about.